Welcome. We have breaking news coming in. Indian air defense radars detected two Pakistani Air Force jets go supersonic 10 kilometers from the LOC in their territory near the Poonch sector. Loud bangs have been heard last night in the area where due to sonic bombs. All Indian air defenses and radar systems are on high alert. We have breaking news coming in. Indian air defense radars detected two Pakistani Air Force jets go supersonic 10 kilometers from the line of control in their territory near the Poonch sector. Loud bangs heard last night in the area were due to sonic booms. All Indian Air Force defense and radar systems are on high alert. And Siddhant Sibal, our principal diplomatic correspondent, joins us now on the phone line. Good evening to you, Siddhant. What are the latest reports coming in?
Well, these are initial media reports. There hasn't been any word from the Indian Air Force on the development. But, of course, the situation remains precarious in the aftermath of the India-Pakistan tensions and, of course, the dogfight which we saw in the end of February month. We also know that the Pakistani airspace has been closed for days now. It will be closed till 14th of March now. And of course, focus right now is to ensure that the tensions diffuse. We also know that the Darpur talks will be taking place between India and Pakistani officials. Diplomats and officials have started to arrive in the Indian city of Amritsar, where they will be going to Atari Wagah border, where the talks will take place. But by and large, what has happened in last 30 minutes is it's a development which still has to be confirmed by the Indian Air Force.
Thank you so much for that report, Siddhant, and he will, of course, be keeping us up to date with the latest. In a few hours from now, the United Nations Security Council will decide on the fate of Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar. China is the only permanent member which has so far blocked the listing of Masood Azhar. It has done so 3 times already, and it looks like Beijing is going to block the move yet again. Just ahead of the vote, China hinted that it may once again block the bid to designate Masood Azhar as a global terrorist. China's foreign ministry spokesperson said, and I quote, "The solution that is acceptable to all sides is conducive to resolve the issue," unquote. While India has pushed for sanctioning Masood Azhar, Pakistan has continued to get Beijing's support on blocking the bid. China has been insisting that the solution should be acceptable to all. Chinese foreign ministry spokesman said, and I quote, "I want to say that China always adopts a responsible attitude, engages in consultations with various parties, and properly deals with the issue. The discussions must follow the rules and procedures of the relevant bodies, and only the solution that is acceptable to all sides is conducive for resolving the issue," unquote. We spoke to Atul Aneja, a senior Indian journalist in Beijing, and asked him why China is blocking India's bid to ban Masood Azhar and what Beijing stands to gain from blocking it. Let's listen in.
The Chinese here are playing a long game. And after India, which will obviously object and protest in case, as we assume, that China will not allow Masood Azhar to be designated as an international terrorist, it would probably try another round of engagement where it would try and build consensus through a very active diplomatic initiative between India and Pakistan. In the long run, China wants both India and Pakistan to be on board its Eurasia-centric project and wean away India from getting too close to the United States, Japan, Australia, the Quad, and the international and the Western alliance system. So I suppose we have not seen an end to it. Whether it's going to succeed or not is a million-dollar question. As of now, India goes into election mode, so I doubt anything much is going to happen from the Indian side. But I think around summer, after the election results are over, we might see another round of diplomacy where China makes an attempt to reconcile differences between between Pakistan and India. Not sure whether it's going to work, but the Chinese have actually taken a very high-profile stance now to interject in the India-Pakistan equation, something which they have never done before in terms of visibility, as they're doing now.
All eyes are on the United Nations Security Council, but in Pakistan's stand on Masood Azhar's listing, that continues to remain unclear. Pakistani Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has said in an interview that Pakistan will not put its friends in trouble. But Pakistan's Foreign Ministry spokesperson had told Wion One that Islamabad's decision on Azhar's listing would be in the country's interest. Meanwhile, China's junior foreign minister was in Islamabad recently, and sources told Wion that the issue of Masood Azhar's listing was a part of the discussion. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that only a solution acceptable to all sides is conducive to the issue. Beijing said that Masood Azhar's listing must follow all rules and procedures of the United Nations. Remember, China has already blocked the listing 3 times. India has slammed Pakistan at the 40th session of the UN Human Rights Council for its sustained support to terrorism and backing up the Jammu and Kashmir issue. It comes just ahead of the decision on the listing Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar under the UN terror list by the UNSC 1267 committee. An Indian diplomat representative said that Islamabad continues supporting terror attacks against India, the latest being the Pulwama terror attack. Mini Devi Kumam reminded Pakistan of its infamous distinction of hosting 132 UN-designated terrorists and 22 terrorist entities.
Pakistan's continued support to cross-border terrorism is the main challenge to protecting the human rights of our citizens in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. The confirmation of using UN-prescribed terror organizations, Jaish-e-Mohammed, as an instrument of state policy by Pakistani military and political leadership is already in public domain.
On the issue of Islamabad raking up the plight of Indian minorities at the world body, the Indian diplomat refocused the attention back on Pakistan's treatment of minorities and their persecution under blasphemy law and denial of basic rights.
Pakistan is known to the international community for its acts of aggressions, harboring safe havens for terrorists, military courts trying civilians, harassment of minorities through blasphemy law, forced conversions and marriages of minorities.
Meanwhile, the sentiment was also echoed by Kashmiri political activists and intellectuals who called on Pakistan's duplicity and hypocrisy on Jammu and Kashmir.
Firstly, Pakistan invaded Jammu and Kashmir in 1947. Since then, it has been an occupier, and now it's a broker, as it is negotiating the sale of Gilgit-Baltistan to Beijing. Mr. President, Pakistan has forcibly divided Jammu and Kashmir while it continues fomenting terrorism and keeps deceiving the world by manifesting itself as a self-styled protector of the rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir for over 7 decades.
So what will happen if the sanctions are imposed against Jaish chief by the panel? Firstly, assets freeze. All member states of the United Nations are required to freeze without delays the funds and other financial assets or economic resources of the designated individuals and entities. Travel ban. All member states are required to prevent the entry into or transit through their territories by designated individuals. An arms embargo. All member states are required to prevent the direct or indirect supply, sale and transfer of arms and all related material. Now, India's aviation regulator has effectively barred the Boeing 737 MAX fleet from flying over Indian airspace. After a meeting of the agency's top heads a few hours ago, the Director General of Civil Aviation said that no Boeing 737 MAX jets will take off or land at any Indian airport.
All the aircraft, MAX, they have been shut by 2:30, and then, as you know, that we have also taken a notum that no aircraft should overfly or come to India or fly outside. So that notum has till 4 that was there. So everybody, even with the international players, they had enough time to adjust to that. So after 4, the AI has passed orders to everyone that no aircraft with MAX, this VT MAX aircraft, that has to be accepted. So that will be fully complied with.
Late last night, India finally decided to ground all Boeing 737 MAXs 3 days after the Ethiopian airline crash. India's aviation watchdog, the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, has decided to suspend the aircraft until appropriate modification and safety measures are undertaken to ensure their safety operation. In India, SpiceJet and Jet Airways operate the 737 MAX 8. SpiceJet has 13 aircrafts of this model in its 75-strong fleet. Jet Airways has 5 B737 MAX 8s. Following the DGCA order, SpiceJet issued a statement, and I quote here, SpiceJet has suspended Boeing 737 MAX operations following the DGCA's decision to ground the aircraft. Safety and security of our passengers and crew and operations are of utmost importance to us, and we will be working with the regulator and the manufacturer to attain normalcy in our operations. We are confident of accommodating the vast majority of our passengers and minimize inconvenience. SpiceJet has earlier defended the Boeing 737 MAX, calling the model highly sophisticated. But why exactly is Donald Trump's Federal Aviation Administration not grounding Boeing 737 MAX? The reason appears to be more political than operational. Ties between Boeing and US President Donald Trump run deep. First, Trump is an aviation enthusiast and was once an owner of an airline. Trump's shuttle was in close contact with Boeing during its 3-year-long lifespan, and before entering the White House, Trump had his personal Boeing 757. Second, Trump's connection with Boeing CEO Muhlenberg isn't new. Remember, Trump had personally negotiated with Muhlenberg to try and lower the cost of a future version of the US presidential aircraft. In July last year, Boeing won a $3.9 billion contract to replace the 2 Air Force One jets. Third, Trump used Boeing products and sites as a backdrop of major presidential announcements. In July last year, Trump spoke about the impact of his tax overhaul bill during his visit to a Boeing plant in St. Louis. It isn't just the US president. Top White House officials, too, have close nexus with Boeing. US Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan worked for Boeing for 31 years before entering the Pentagon. Former US Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, has been nominated by Boeing to join its board of directors. Apart from these, there are some more facts that help solve the puzzle of Trump's Boeing bias. Boeing is United States' second largest defense contractor. The company received $104 billion in unclassified defense contracts between 2014 and 2018. It is no surprise that the Trump administration has repeatedly urged its allies to buy Boeing products. According to reports, it was Trump who had pressed the Emir of Kuwait to go ahead with a long-delayed deal with Boeing for its FA-18 Super Hornet fighter jets. This is by no way the first time that Trump is batting for Boeing. Boeing CEO Muhlenberg had earlier said that purchases of US-made aircraft could be a part of the China-US trade deal. Mikey Kay, former RAF pilot and investigative journalist, joins us live from Paris. Good evening to you. What is your assessment of how safe or how risky the Boeing 737 MAX 8 is?
I think when we're talking about the term unsafe, in aviation terms, I think the professionals would use the term risk, and risk is probability versus consequence. And I think that's how the progress or the forward decision making going on beyond the Ethiopian Airlines crash, the 737 MAX 8 crash, should be assessed. It should be through a process of delicate risk assessment. And what do I mean by that? I mean that as it stands right now, there is limited evidence as to what actually happened to the Ethiopian Airlines crash coming out of Addis Ababa en route to Nairobi. The two black boxes, the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, have been recovered. And the latest reporting on the data assimilation of those two boxes is that the Ethiopians don't have the technology or the best technology to actually gain that data, and they're going to send it out of the country for that data to be analyzed. Probably, I would suggest, to the United States, the NTSB, who have all the technology to be able to gain the data from these two black boxes as quickly as possible. So I think when we're talking about, is the aircraft safe to fly based on what countries are deciding to ground it? So the UK has decided to ground it, Australia has, China has. There are many, many countries that have taken the precautionary measure to ground the 737 MAX 8. But the United States has decided not to do that. The FAA has decided that it isn't going, at the moment, to ground those aircraft.
All right, so then what then do you think is holding the FAA back?
Why the FAA might be making this decision, I think, is the most interesting question. If I was part of the investigation team, or I was the CEO of a major airline that was trying to understand the risk as to whether to ground the aircraft or not, and obviously that is determined by the FAA or the CAA or whatever operating authority, air operating authority it is, I would be looking at the previous information and evidence that came from the Lion Air crash in October 2018, and the conclusions of that. And those conclusions, if I can just sort of briefly go through what the conclusions were, was it was effectively a problem with the angle of attack sensors on the new aircraft. What is angle of attack? Well, this is called the leading edge of a wing, and this is called the trailing edge of the wing. And the line between these two and the line between the forward airflow, this angle here is called the angle of attack. And that's really important in aviation, because as the angle of attack increases, the potential for the airspeed to decrease if the throttle isn't pushed forward, the power, is quite high. And as the airspeed decreases and the angle of attack increases, it brings the aircraft nearer to what's called a stall. And a stall is a catastrophic loss of lift. So what these sensors on the 737 MAX 8 do is they detect when this angle of attack and the airspeed is getting low, and they push that information into what's called an MCAS, which is a fancy name, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, for a digital box that sends messages to the flight control system to push the nose forward. That's an automatic occurrence within the software and the equipment on this new type of 737. So what happened in the Lion Air crash was that you were getting erroneous messages from these angle of attack sensors when the actual angle of attack wasn't that high, which was forcing the aircraft to take a nose down or trim down attitude. And that's obviously at low altitude and at fairly high speeds. You know, that is an extremely dangerous situation for the crew to be in. The reason why this is all important, Molly, is because when that information came out, the FAA decided that it was going to issue an emergency airworthiness directive, and that came out in December 2018. And that basically advised Boeing to incorporate procedures and information about this erroneous occurrence into the operating manuals of all of the airlines that were operating the 737 MAX 8 and 9.
Why would Boeing not lay enough emphasis on system-specific training?
So where we're at, basically, is we're trying to understand how much of the airworthiness directive that ordered Boeing to incorporate procedures and protocols and information about these erroneous instances that were happening between the angle of attack sensors and the MCAS, how much of that information was A, included in the operating manuals, and B, was acted upon by the airlines and the operating authorities in terms of the training that the crews got about the actual software, the training and understanding that the crews got from the conclusions of the Lion Air crash, and I'd say most importantly, the opportunity for crews to act upon that information in an emergency environment in the simulator to practice that emergency. And so that is going to be different, I would suggest, from Southwest Airlines that operates it in the United States, through to Ethiopian Airlines that operate obviously in Ethiopia, and Indonesian Airlines, and all of these airlines that operate this particular type of 737 around the world. So going back to the initial question, how safe or unsafe is it? I would use all of that information to assess the risk depending on what action the airlines had taken based on the information that Boeing put into the operating manuals, if all the operating manuals of all the airlines had that information in it, and then how much time, energy and resource was put into training the crews up to try and understand and deal with that problem if it ever happened.
Thank you very much for that there, Mikey. That is Mikey K, a former RAF pilot and an investigative journalist joining us here on Wion. Now moving on to our next story. A 3-story building in Nigeria's largest city, Lagos, has crashed. Several are feared trapped beneath the rubble. Massive rescue operations are underway to pull out survivors. The building housed by a primary school, and many fear that the school students are amongst those trapped. These visuals on your screen show rescuers climbing over piles of broken concrete and twisted metal.